She's been family to us longer than you have. My son deserves to have both his mom and dad. My husband said, then invited his ex-wife to Thanksgiving. I didn't argue. I just stayed silent and walked out of the house. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. When the door opened, his face turned pale. I remember the exact way the cranberry sauce slid across the porcelain dish, slow and glossy as if it were trying to escape the table. The kind of small, meaningless detail your mind clings to when something much bigger is breaking just beneath the surface. It was late November in Northern Virginia, the kind of cold that settles into the bones, and the house, his parents' house, smelled like roasted turkey sage, and something else I couldn't quite name anymore. Maybe it was distance. Maybe it was the quiet realization that I had already lost a place I thought I belonged. We had been married for 3 years, Daniel and I, and for most of that time, we had lived with his parents under what everyone liked to call a temporary arrangement, though temporary has a way of stretching when it suits the people who benefit from it. After Daniel's business had stalled and the rent in Arlington kept rising, his mother had offered us the basement suite, 2 rooms, a small bathroom, a kitchenette that hummed louder than it worked, and I had said yes, because that's what you do when you're trying to build something with someone. You compromise, you bend, you believe it will lead somewhere better. I paid more than half of our expenses quietly without making a performance of it, because I had a stable job with a regional insurance firm and Daniel had ideas. He always had ideas. A new app, a consulting venture, a friend who just needed a little backing, and I had supported him each time, not blindly, but with the cautious optimism of someone who believes effort should be met with patience. His parents saw it differently. To them, I was practical, yes, but also temporary. Useful, perhaps, but not essential. His ex-wife Megan, on the other hand, was history shared, history the kind that grows roots and refuses to be pulled out. She and Daniel had divorced 5 years before I met him, and they shared a son, Ethan, who was now 9. A quiet boy with observant eyes, the kind that seemed to understand more than anyone gave him credit for. Megan lived across town in Alexandria, and by all accounts she was decent. We were not enemies, not exactly. We were 2 women orbiting the same gravity. Careful not to collide, but never entirely comfortable in the same space. Until that night. Daniel, his mother said, setting down a dish with a little too much force. Did you tell her? I remember looking up, fork halfway to my mouth, catching the glance they shared, brief, practiced, and already finished before I could fully read it. Daniel cleared his throat the way he always did when he was about to soften something sharp. I invited Megan to join us for Thanksgiving, he said too casually, as if he were mentioning the weather or a football game. For Ethan, it just makes sense. The room shifted, not physically, but in that subtle way a space changes when the air becomes heavier. I felt it press against my chest, slow and deliberate. I waited 1 second, 2, maybe 3, for the follow-up. The explanation that would include me in the decision, that would acknowledge this was my home too, even if it was technically his parents'. It didn't come. His mother smiled, a small, satisfied curve of her lips. It's the right thing to do, she added. Ethan shouldn't have to choose between his parents on a holiday. I set my fork down, carefully aligning it with the edge of the plate, because control, however small, felt necessary in that moment. You could have told me, I said, my voice even almost detached, which surprised me. Daniel shrugged, not dismissively but not apologetically either. We're telling you now, he replied. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. I glanced at the table, his father quiet as always, focused on his food. His mother composed and certain. Daniel relaxed, already moving past the moment as if it had resolved itself. And then there was me, suddenly aware that I was the only one who hadn't agreed to something that had already been decided. She's been family to us longer than you have, his mother said, then her tone not cruel, not overtly, just factual, as if she were stating a simple truth about the weather or the time. My son deserves to have both a father and a mother in the same room for 1 day. Daniel nodded almost reflexively. It's just Thanksgiving, he added. Don't make it into something it's not. But it was already something. I looked at him. really looked this time and tried to find the man I had married in the easy confidence of his expression, the one who used to ask my opinion before making decisions that affected both of us. He was there technically, but layered beneath something else. A quiet alignment with the people who had known him longer, who defined family in a way that did not fully include me. I'm not making it into anything I said, and I realized as the words left my mouth that they were true. I wasn't raising my voice, wasn't arguing, wasn't demanding a different outcome. I was simply noticing. Megan arrived an hour later, right on time, dressed in a soft gray sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail that made her look younger than I remembered. Ethan ran to the door before anyone else could reach it, his excitement genuine, uncomplicated. He hugged his mother, then his father, then looked around as if making sure everyone was where they were supposed to be. "Hi," Megan said to me, polite, careful. "Happy Thanksgiving." "Happy Thanksgiving," I replied, matching her tone. We moved through the motions, serving dishes, passing plates, making small talk about work, school, the traffic on I-395. Everything outwardly normal, everything just slightly misaligned beneath the surface. Megan and Daniel spoke easily, not flirtatiously, but with a familiarity that didn't need to be rebuilt. They laughed at small things, shared glances over Ethan's stories, and each time I felt something inside me shift, not dramatically, but steadily. Like a foundation settling in ways it shouldn't. His mother watched them with a quiet satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. At one point, as I stood at the counter refilling glasses, I caught my reflection in the darkened window, my face composed, eyes clear, posture straight, and I wondered, not for the first time, how someone could be so present in a room and still feel entirely unnecessary. "You're quiet tonight," Daniel said later, leaning against the doorway, a glass of wine in his hand. "I'm listening," I answered. He studied me for a moment, then shrugged again, that familiar gesture that seemed to close conversations before they could open. "Don't overthink this," he said. "It's just for Ethan." "Just for Ethan." I nodded because there was no point in arguing with a narrative that had already been accepted by everyone else. Instead, I finished what I was doing, wiped my hands on a towel, and set it neatly on the counter. "I'm going to step out for a bit," I said. Daniel frowned slightly. "Now we're about to do dessert. I won't be long." No one stopped me as I grabbed my coat. No one asked where I was going. Megan was helping Ethan with something at the table. His mother was arranging plates. His father was pouring coffee, and Daniel was already turning back toward the room, as if my absence would be temporary, insignificant, easily filled. The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside, sharp and clean, and I inhaled deeply, letting it settle my thoughts. The quiet of the street, the distant hum of traffic, the faint glow of porch lights. Everything felt more honest out there, less curated, less controlled. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, not moving, not rushing. Because this wasn't impulsive, wasn't emotional in the way they would later assume. This had been building for months, small dismissals, quiet decisions made without me, a pattern that had finally become impossible to ignore. I started the engine. 30 minutes later, as the house filled with the sound of dishes and laughter I could already imagine without being there, the doorbell rang. And when Daniel opened the door expecting nothing more than a neighbor or a late delivery, he saw exactly what I had decided he needed to see. Daniel would later tell me that the first thing he noticed was not the man's face, but the folder in his hand, thick, neatly tabbed, the kind of folder that suggests preparation, finality, and a process already in motion. It was the kind of detail that would have meant nothing to him a month earlier, but in that moment, standing in the warm doorway of his parents' house with Thanksgiving still lingering in the air, it became the only thing he could focus on. "Daniel Harper," the man asked, his tone professional, neutral. Daniel nodded, instinctively cautious now. "Yeah. Can I help you?" The man glanced down at his clipboard, then back up. "You've been served," he said, simply extending the documents forward. Behind Daniel, the house continued as if nothing had changed. Silverware clinked, someone laughed, his mother probably, and Ethan's voice carried faintly from the dining room. For a split second, Daniel didn't move, as if the words needed time to rearrange themselves into something less significant. Served, he repeated slower this time. Divorce papers, the man clarified, already shifting his weight as if preparing to leave. You'll find all relevant details inside. You've got 30 days to respond. Daniel took the folder almost automatically, his fingers tightening around the edges as the weight of it settled in. Wait, he said, stepping forward slightly. There's gotta be some mistake. There's no mistake, the man replied, not unkindly, but without interest. Have a good evening. The door closed with a soft, definitive click. For a moment, Daniel just stood there staring at the papers in his hands, as if they might dissolve if he waited long enough. As if this was still a conversation he could opt out of. Then he turned slowly, the warmth of the house suddenly too much, too bright, too normal for what had just happened. Who was that? His mother called from the dining room. Daniel didn't answer right away. He walked back in the folder, still unopened, his expression shifting from confusion to something sharper, more unsettled. Megan noticed first. She always had been observant, and her eyes followed him as he stopped at the edge of the table. What is it? She asked quietly. Daniel set the folder down on the table, the sound heavier than it should have been. It's from her, he said, not needing to say my name. His mother frowned, irritation flashing across her face. From who? My wife, Daniel said the word, catching slightly this time. Silence spread across the room, not loud, not dramatic, but immediate and complete. Even Ethan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth, looking between the adults with a child's instinctive awareness that something had shifted. Daniel opened the folder, then flipping through the first few pages with increasing urgency. Legal language precise and structured, outlining terms that had clearly been considered long before this moment. Dissolution of marriage, division of assets, requests for disclosure. Everything laid out in a way that left very little room for improvisation. What is this? His mother demanded, pushing her chair back slightly. What is she trying to do? Daniel didn't respond immediately. He was reading now, really reading, and with each line his face changed, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally something closer to understanding, though not the kind he wanted. She filed last week, he said slowly. Everything's already in process. Last week, his mother repeated, her voice rising. And you're just finding out now. I didn't know. Daniel snapped, sharper than he intended. Megan leaned forward slightly, her brow furrowed. What does it say? She asked. Daniel hesitated, then exhaled, flipping to another section. She's asking for a full financial disclosure, he said. Accounts, investments, debts, everything. That's standard, Megan said quietly, though her eyes flicked to his, searching for something more. Daniel nodded, but there was a tension in his shoulders now, a stiffness that hadn't been there before. Yeah, he said. But she's listed assets I didn't even know she had separated. His mother scoffed. What assets? You two barely have anything. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he turned another page, scanning quickly, his jaw tightening. She's moved her accounts, he said. Closed the joint checking. Transferred her savings. There's a note here about independent holdings. Independent? His mother repeated, incredulous. Since when does she have independent anything? You're married. Daniel looked up at her then, and for the first time that night, there was something like uncertainty in his eyes, not just about the situation, but about the assumptions he had been operating under. She's always handled the bills, he said slowly. Rent, utilities, insurance. I trusted her to manage it. Megan sat back slightly, her expression shifting into something more measured, more cautious. That means she knows exactly where everything is, she said, and now she's organized it before filing. The implication settled heavily in the room. She planned this, Daniel said, the realization landing fully now. His mother shook her head, dismissive, almost offended. Planned what? Leaving over. What, a holiday dinner? Don't be ridiculous. She's overreacting, that's all. Daniel didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. He was still flipping through the documents, slower now, more deliberate, as if each page might reveal something he had missed. She's not asking for the house, he said after a moment. His mother straightened slightly, as if bracing. Of course she isn't. It's not hers to ask for. She's not asking for anything from you, Daniel clarified. This is just between us. Good, his mother said quickly. Then it's simple. You'll talk to her, explain that this is all a misunderstanding, and she'll withdraw it. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the final page where my signature sat clear, steady, unmistakable. Beneath it, the date. Last week. While he had been working on his latest idea, while we had been sharing meals, conversations, routines that now felt strangely rehearsed, I had already taken the first legal step toward leaving. She didn't even tell me, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Megan watched him for a moment, then spoke carefully. Maybe she felt like she couldn't, she said. His mother scoffed again. Oh, please. She's being dramatic. You invite your ex-wife over for the sake of your child, and suddenly she's filing for divorce. That's not reasonable. Daniel closed the folder, the sound final controlled. It's not just tonight, he said, his voice lower now. It's everything. That earned him a sharp look from his mother. Everything, she repeated. What exactly has she been lacking? Daniel, a roof over her head? A family that welcomes her? What more does she expect? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because the answer, now that he was forced to consider it, wasn't as simple as his mother wanted it to be. Megan stood then, moving toward the sink with quiet efficiency, giving the moment space without leaving it entirely. Ethan had gone back to his plate, though his movements were slower, more cautious now. Are you going to call her? Megan asked over her shoulder. Daniel looked down at his phone, still resting on the table untouched since he'd come back inside. He picked it up. The screen lit up immediately. No missed calls, no messages, nothing that suggested urgency from my side. That more than anything unsettled him. He dialed anyway. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. He tried again. Straight to voicemail. Daniel lowered the phone slowly, the silence on the other end louder than any argument we had ever had. She's not picking up, he said. His mother waved a dismissive hand. Let her cool off, she said. She'll come back once she realizes she's made a mistake. But Daniel wasn't so sure anymore. Because for the first time since the door had opened, since the folder had been placed in his hands, he was beginning to understand something he had overlooked for far too long. I hadn't reacted. I hadn't argued. I hadn't even stayed. I had simply acted. And that made all the difference. I did not answer Daniel's calls that night, or the next morning, or the day after. Not out of spite, not to punish him with silence, but because I had already said everything that mattered in the only language he had ever taken seriously: action. Words in our marriage had been easy to dismiss, to soften, to reframe, until they no longer required change. Paperwork, however, does not negotiate, and once filed, it moves forward whether you are ready or not. I checked into a modest extended-stay hotel in Tysons, the kind that offered weekly rates, a small kitchenette, and just enough distance to think clearly. I unpacked what I needed, set my laptop on the desk, and opened the folder I had been building for weeks. Bank statements, insurance policies, tax returns, a quiet record of a life I had managed carefully, while everyone else assumed it simply existed. It is a strange thing to realize how invisible your contributions have been until you stop making them. The lights still turn on, the bills still get paid for a while, and then gradually the system begins to reveal its dependencies. I had not hidden anything, not truly. I had simply organized it, separated what was mine, closed what was shared, and ensured that when I stepped away, I would not take more than my portion, but I would not leave behind what I had built either. On Monday morning, I went to work as usual. The office in Fairfax was quiet, familiar, a place where my identity was defined by competence rather than relationships. My colleague Karen noticed the change immediately. She always did, but she did not press, only placed a cup of coffee on my desk and said, "You look like you've made a decision," in that gentle, knowing way of hers. "I have," I replied. "Then whatever comes next," she said, "you'll handle it." I nodded, because that at least was something I could control. Daniel's messages grew more frequent as the day went on, first confusion, then concern, then a sharper edge of urgency. He asked where I was, why I hadn't said anything, what this was all about, and finally, if we could talk. I read each one carefully, not rushing, not reacting, and then, at the end of the day, I replied with a single line. We can speak through our attorneys for now. It was not cruel. It was not dramatic. It was simply appropriate. By the time I returned to the hotel that evening, my phone was quiet again. Back at his parents' house, the quiet had taken on a different quality. Daniel had spent the morning going through the documents again, slower this time, tracing each line, each clause as if repetition might reveal an error he had missed. There were none. The filing was clean, thorough, and unmistakably deliberate. He had called 2 attorneys already, one recommended by a friend, another found through a quick search, and both had said the same thing in slightly different ways. She's prepared, the first had told him. You need to be too. Prepared. The word lingered. What do you mean? Prepared, his mother had asked when he relayed the conversation, her tone defensive, almost offended on his behalf. She's a receptionist at an insurance office. What could she possibly prepare? She's not a receptionist, Daniel corrected automatically, though he realized as he said it that he had never fully explained my role to his parents. It had been easier to let them assume something simpler, less consequential. She manages accounts, he added, corporate clients, policies worth millions. His mother waved a hand dismissively. That's just paperwork. Daniel did not argue this time. He simply went back to the folder. The second attorney had been more direct. You've got a joint checking account, he had asked. We did, Daniel replied. She closed it. Of course she did, the attorney said. Any joint savings? Number. Credit cards. One shared. She paid it off last week. There had been a pause on the other end of the line, the kind that signals a recalculation. Then here's the reality, the attorney said. She's limited her exposure, secured her assets, and filed first. That doesn't mean you're in trouble, but it does mean you're behind. Behind. Daniel sat at the kitchen table now, the same place we had shared countless ordinary moments, and tried to map out a version of our life that made sense in light of what he was discovering. The problem was the version he had been living in did not match the one documented in the papers before him. She moved her direct deposit, he said to his mother, who was pacing slightly now, restless, unsettled. Last pay cycle. How would she even do that without you knowing, she demanded. Daniel looked up at her, something like realization settling in his expression. Because it was never my account, he said. It was hers. I was just using it. The words landed harder than he expected. Megan, who had stayed longer than planned, mostly for Ethan's sake, watched the exchange with quiet attention. She had always been practical, grounded in ways that Daniel had once appreciated and later resented, and now that steadiness returned. You should listen to your lawyer, she said, and maybe try to understand why she did this before you decide how to respond. His mother turned sharply. Oh, so now you're taking her side. I'm not taking sides, Megan replied calmly. I'm pointing out that people don't usually file for divorce like this, unless they've been thinking about it for a long time. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. She didn't say anything, he muttered. Megan's gaze softened just slightly. Are you sure, she asked? The question lingered. Because as Daniel thought back not just to Thanksgiving but to the weeks before it, he began to notice things he had overlooked. Small comments, questions about bills, a request to review their expenses that he had brushed off a moment when she had stood in the doorway as if waiting for him to ask something he never did. She tried, he said quietly, the realization not dramatic but steady. His mother shook her head, unwilling to shift her position. Even if she did, this is still an overreaction, she insisted. You invite your ex-wife over one time and she files for divorce. That's not reasonable. It wasn't one time, Daniel said more firmly now. It was a pattern. The word felt foreign in his mouth but accurate. Megan nodded slightly as if that confirmed something she had already suspected. What are you going to do? She asked. Daniel looked down at the folder again, at the clean lines of text, the signature at the bottom of the final page, and for the first time since the door had opened, since the papers had been placed in his hands, he understood that this was not a situation he could talk his way out of. I'm going to respond, he said, properly. And her, his mother pressed. You're just going to let her walk away like this? Daniel hesitated. Because the truth was, I had not simply walked away. I had stepped out of a system I had been holding together, and now, without that support, the structure was beginning to shift in ways none of them had anticipated. "She's already gone," he said quietly. And for the first time, the weight of that statement settled fully in the room. Not anger, not panic. Something else. Understanding. The first week after I left, nothing dramatic happened, and that more than anything unsettled Daniel. Because he had expected noise, confrontation, some emotional fallout he could respond to, negotiate with, contain. Instead, what he got was silence, and a slow unraveling that didn't announce itself until it was already underway. It started with something small. The internet went out. His father noticed, first tapping the router, muttering about the provider, but when Daniel checked the account, he found the service had been transferred, closed under the shared arrangement, and reopened under a different name, a different billing address. Mine. "That's ridiculous," his mother snapped. "Call them. Tell them it's a mistake." "It's not a mistake," Daniel said, already knowing. The utilities followed the same pattern, not shut off, not abruptly, but restructured. Reassigned, each one revealing a quiet truth. I had been the one managing them all, not just paying but organizing, maintaining, ensuring nothing slipped. Without me, the system didn't collapse. It hesitated, then demanded attention no one had been prepared to give. "Why didn't you handle any of this?" his mother asked, her frustration now directed at him. Daniel didn't answer because the honest response that he had never needed to felt insufficient. At the same time, his business, his latest venture, began to show cracks he could no longer ignore. The investor he had been relying on pulled back, citing uncertainty, and the friend who had promised support became harder to reach, slower to respond. It wasn't sabotage, it was reality. Catching up. Meanwhile, I continued my routine. Work, meetings, emails, quiet evenings in a space that was mine, even if temporary. I met with my attorney twice that week, reviewing documents, clarifying terms. Nothing rushed, nothing emotional, just decisions made carefully based on facts. I wasn't trying to take everything. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I was drawing a line. Daniel finally reached me on the 8th day. Not by phone, I had stopped answering those, but through a message that was different from the others. Shorter, stripped of urgency, almost deliberate. "Can we meet just to talk? No arguments." I read it twice, then once more, considering not just the words but the shift in tone. There was something quieter there, something that suggested he was beginning to understand that this wasn't something he could push through with persistence alone. I replied, "1 hour, public place." We met at a cafe in Vienna, halfway between his parents' house and my office, neutral ground, quiet enough for conversation, public enough to keep things contained. Daniel arrived early. I could tell by the way he was already seated, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked different. Not dramatically, not broken. Just aware. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. "I said I would," I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us wasn't hostile. It was measured, cautious, like two people learning how to communicate in a language they should have understood all along. "I got the papers," he said finally. "I know. I've been going through everything," he continued, choosing his words carefully now. "The accounts, the bills, the structure." I nodded slightly. "That's the idea." He exhaled a faint, humorless sound. "You handled more than I realized." "Yes." There was no accusation in my tone, just fact. "I should have paid attention," he said. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the statement settle, not rushing to fill the silence the way I used to. "It's not just about the money," he added after a moment. "I know that." "No," I agreed, "it isn't." He leaned back slightly, studying me as if trying to understand something he had missed before. "Then why didn't you say anything?" he asked. "Before all this." I met his gaze, steady, calm. "I did," I said. "You just didn't hear it." The words weren't sharp, but they landed. Daniel looked down at the table, his fingers tracing the edge of the cup. I thought we were okay," he admitted. "I thought we were partners," I replied. Another silence. "Thanksgiving." He began, then stopped as if unsure how to continue. "That wasn't the beginning," I said. "It was just the moment it became clear." Clear what he asked. That I wasn't being included in decisions that affected my life, I said. That your definition of family didn't fully include me. That's not true, he said quickly. I didn't argue, I just held his gaze. And after a moment he looked away. I didn't mean for it to come across that way, he said quieter now. I know, I replied. That doesn't change how it felt. He nodded, slowly absorbing that. What do you want now, he asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight. I want clarity, I said. I want a life where I'm not an afterthought. And us, he pressed. I paused. Because this was the part that mattered, not the paperwork, not the logistics, but the decision that came after understanding. I don't think we can go back to what we had, I said. He closed his eyes briefly, as if he had expected that answer, but still needed to hear it. Can we build something new, he asked. The question hung there, fragile, uncertain. I considered it, not emotionally, but honestly. Maybe, I said finally, but not right now. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting more than agreeing. I'm sorry, he said then, and this time it was different. Not defensive, not rushed, not framed as a way to move past the moment, but simply offered. I believed him. That didn't mean I would stay. I know, I said. We sat there for a few more minutes, not speaking, not needing to. The conversation had shifted something, not enough to undo what had happened, but enough to make the next steps clearer. When I stood to leave, Daniel didn't try to stop me. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. And as I walked out of the cafe back into the quiet rhythm of a life I was rebuilding on my own terms, I realized something that had taken me far too long to understand. Revenge wasn't what I had done. I had simply stopped accepting less than I deserved. The divorce did not happen all at once. It moved the way most real things do in America, through paperwork, scheduled calls, measured disclosures, and a sequence of small decisions that add up to a life-changing course. Weeks became months, and in that time, something steadier replaced the shock that had once colored everything. Not relief, not regret.